welcome to another edition of Inside the War Room. Ryan Ray here with a gentleman I met on my trip to China last November. I don't know how many people say they went to China and met a man from South America, but I can say that. And it was, we had some, as we were talking offline, some spirited conversations, to put it mildly, while we were there. Cristobal Vasquez, you were all over the place. So why don't you tell folks a little bit about, who you are and kind of what all you do, because I would not do it justice to try to summarize all the things that you get your hands in.
Perfect, Ryan. Well, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me on your show. Well, I'm a Colombian Canadian journalist. I was born in Colombia, and I moved when I was a kid to Canada. I lived in Montreal. Then I've been, yes, all over. I've lived in New York, in Miami. I lived in London, and of course in Colombia, in South America, where I've spent half of my life in Colombia. The other half of my life, yeah. In New York, Washington, Montreal, and Miami, basically, also London. I did a master's degree in London and in New York in public administration, and now I am the Washington correspondent for Caracol. So Caracol is the largest media outlet in Colombia. We have radio and TV back in Colombia, and we're owned by a Spanish company called Grupo Prisa. Grupo Prisa is the largest Spanish-speaking media conglomerate, and they own all sorts of media outlets in Latin America. They're present in China and in Chile, Argentina, Brazil, Panama, Mexico, and of course Colombia as well. And they own El País, which is the largest newspaper in Mexico too. So yeah, we're a big family of outlets in Spanish-speaking countries around the world, and I'm part of that family. So yes, that's what I do. I've been here working 4 years now in Washington. I came months before the election when Trump got elected, so I had to cover large part of the campaign and the election, and then I've been covering this past 3 years and a half. It's been very interesting.
Yeah, and yeah, like I said, you got your hands in kind of everything. One of the things, there's a couple of things from the China trip. It was me and you and two other journalists, right? There's four of us total. Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So I was the oddball out on a couple of occasions. One, I was probably the only libertarian on the trip. I'd say probably I was the only libertarian on the trip, which that's not uncommon for me to be the only libertarian in the room. And the other thing is I was the only non-journalist. I'm a commentator or whatever you want to call it. Not. I don't claim the moniker of a journalist, and so that kind of obviously was a little bit different than what you guys do on a daily basis, which is
you were the only non-journalist, but also you were always just putting up the conversations and putting us to talk all the time while we were driving and during our bus trips. You were the one just coming up with like interesting topics and always taking all the passion we have as journalists to argue and to try to make a point differently from what you were saying, and that just made it very interesting. You always had this other way of looking at things that contradicted all our sort of like train of thought. So it was very interesting to have you on the trip. Journalists tend to be weird, sometimes boring, because we always focus on asking questions and like preparing our notes and preparing the articles we write and then going straight to the point. But then you were always about the debate and about how to see it in a different way. So I think that honestly, despite our passionate conversations, I think we learn a lot from you, I think.
Well, the only time that I can really remember, we had a good spirited debate about schools, and I've thought a lot about that conversation since we've had that, and how I'd like to reparse some of my points. But one time I think we really had a headbutt that I can remember. You might have a couple from your perspective, and it's one I thought about a lot. Was we were at a spot and you were trying to ask this gentleman, who was funding this project, and from my perspective, it seemed like he didn't genuinely have any insight on that, and he was kind of confused by the question. And I was like, "Hey, man, he doesn't know." And you're like, "No." He kind of got frustrated that I cut him. I gave him the ability to opt out of the question. And I thought about that a lot since then because it really perturbed you. And I was like, I don't know what the big deal was. And I thought, it's quite possible that that man, and I don't have no idea, knew exactly what you're asking and was trying to deflect the question. And you, being the journalist, are trying to press him to answer the question because you've probably been deflected answers a lot. And I'm over here going like, dude, the guy doesn't know. Let's move on. And I really kind of appreciate that you took it with a vigor that you're like, no, 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 he needs to answer this question. You don't give him the option to get out. And so we've never really talked about that a lot since then. But I just want to say I thought about that a lot, and I really since then I've really come to respect the reason that you didn't the reason for your frustration, which was I gave him the ability not to answer the question, even if he really didn't know. He just needed to say, "I just don't know." Compared to me kind of saying, "Wow, man, he doesn't know. Come on, let's go about our business." And you go, "No, no, no, no. He needs to at least give me some answer." And so I want to say that because I got to tell you that since then. I thought about that a lot.
Yeah, that happened. It was interesting. We were at this complex. I think it was one of this eco cities that the
Mm-hmm.
Chinese had built close to. I think this was close to
In Ben High,
Shanghai.
maybe I can't
Yeah,
remember.
exactly. Yes. So yeah, no, that was an interesting experience. And but it was. Remember the person who was actually organizing the trip, Luca?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I remember him. He also was like, yeah, don't ask those sort of questions. And I was like, yeah, but why is it that I mean, we're journalists. We have to ask
Right,
questions and uncomfortable questions,
right.
and yeah, not asking questions about this huge complex,
Mm-hmm.
this amazing. It was quite. It's actually a beautiful thing to go visit,
Mm-hmm.
and asking that question was, yeah, it was. I think the other two journalists there were also like, yeah, it's better not to know. I'm like, yeah, but wait. I mean, it's clearly they're not going to say the answer. Clearly, they're not going to
Mm-hmm.
say who's funding this because it's. Well, you remember, Ryan? We were just seeing nonstop all these buildings that were
Right.
uh, that were built, and very few people were living in those buildings. So we were just seeing and seeing buildings and buildings and buildings that were completely void, and then it's like, yeah, but why are you building all this? No one lives in there
Right.
in those buildings, and then who's actually just paying for all this? No, I remember when we went to the embassy, to the American embassy.
Mm-hmm.
This was in Beijing,
Mm-hmm.
and he told us, look, when you hear about private investment in China, it's not private investment; it's public investment.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that there is some percentage of public participation in those companies, but sorry, there's some percentage of private participation in those companies, but most of it is it's public. Most of it is public. And then when you analyze the Huawei situation, you see that Huawei is part of a larger conglomerate of companies, and I think, if I'm not wrong, it's like 46, 47% of it, it's owned by the Chinese government, that conglomerate of companies where Huawei is in them. It's pretty much owned by the government. So it's by the Chinese government. So yes, at the end, it's like they're not allowed to say it, and they were not allowed to say it as you say, because they were it was the response was going to end up being, yeah, the government finances this, although they know it's not going to be profitable, and they know no one's going to live in these buildings. We just want to show them, and we just want to spend the money we have. And we, at the end, there is a lot of corruption in the Chinese government, and all this, like, real estate companies are going to the friends of the government, so they don't want to give out names. It's crazy. I was looking the other day, right, at the second largest richest man in Mexico. There is no picture of the guy in Mexico. The richest one is Carlos Slim, the
Mm-hmm.
guy. He's famous all around the world. But who's the second one? And then he made the news because a picture of him got filtered, and then the guy pretty much owns 95% of all the mining industry in Mexico, and it was insane. So I think my guess is they just didn't want to give any names, no. But yeah, I think that's the role of journalist, and I think it was I do have to accept, I got really really upset, not only at you but also at the team, because the team was like, yeah, let's just move on, let's just get out of here, don't ask stupid questions. And like, yeah, but what's the point of coming here, all the way in China,
Yeah.
to not put them, give them some pressure and ask them if they were facing like Western journalists.
Mhm.
They had to expect uncomfortable questions. No,
Mhm.
they were just coming up with nonsense. Remember, they're just coming
Oh,
up
yeah.
with like
Yeah.
silly answers to
Mhm.
just avoid the well, avoid the truth, avoid the what's behind all that. No.
Right, right. Well, good. We've buried that hatchet, if you will. So, but it was interesting just to hang around yourself and some other journalists because it on some level, some of the things that you guys would say or think compared to me, and I hate to put everyone in the same group, at least yourself and some of the perspectives you guys brought. It does. I think one of the things that would be helpful is if journalists, and I don't know what the forum for something like that would be, but if journalists could talk about, um, how they distinguish reporting the news versus commenting on the news. Because I was telling someone this the other day. It feels like Fox News, whether you love them or hate them, what they did was they would have the news during the day, and they'd kind of blend in their opinion people, and then at night they'd just switch to straight opinion. Sean Hannity or Bill O'Reilly, and
Yeah.
if you're a viewer, you're not paying attention, and you might not realize it went from more news based to more opinion based. And to Fox News's credit, sometimes and sometimes they didn't. They would say, hey, I'm just an opinion guy, or Handy would say something like that. I don't watch those shows. I haven't watched that stuff in years, but I just remember Handy. I'm not news. I'm an opinion guy. But they also weren't also trying to draw the line. Whereas if you open up, the New York Times or the Washington Post, it's very clear where the opinion is and where the news is supposed to be. With cable news, it's kind of gotten to where it's all blended together. And now with Twitter, you kind of see where a reporter might tweet out a story that he just is breaking a news, and then all of a sudden there's commentary. It's like, well, okay, hold on. It's hard, I think, for the outside, for us non-journalists to figure out when does the journalist have on his journalistic hat and when does he have on his normal person opinion hat. And it feels like having those conversations that we had, I thought was, at least from my perspective, very helpful to kind of sharpen some of those. We had a good conversation one time about unnamed sources and stuff like that. And so, but those are conversations that are kind of, I don't say they're held back. It's just they're not held out. They're not out in for everyone to see. And I think when you see some of the tensions, at least between the media, the journalists, and the public now, is there's just probably perceptions, right, wrong, or indifferent about what's going on. And so hopefully, more of those conversations could be had in the future about what do journalists feel like their role is, when are they actually being a journalist, or when they're just commenting, because you've got opinions, right? You're a human. So you have opinions. It's not as if you're out of opinion, but how does the reader interpret those things? But let's talk a little bit. One of the things I've credited to you privately, at least to some of my friends, is that
Hey, sorry, Ryan.
yes,
Can I add something on what you just said?
yes, please do, please do.
And it has to do with this recent New York Times scandal. The
The op-ed
uh,
with Tom Cotton.
Yeah, exactly,
Mhm.
with Tom Cotton and this guy Bennett, the
Oh, the
opinion
editor.
editor
Yeah.
who resigned. Yeah. Um, well, my sort of my take with all this and with this line that it's hard to draw between uh, when you're actually informing and when you're just commenting about things.
Hmm.
I I, I I would have to I would have to put and to add there that there is a lot of entertaining and entertainment industry going on that's trying to sort of like blend in with media. No, you
Hmm.
see it in CNN a lot.
Hmm.
You see it in Fox News. You see it in a lot of, especially the TV channels, the TV news
Hmm.
outlets
Yep.
are 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 yes, it's about informing and of course they have their shows where most of it is information, but then when you turn CNN from like 7 onwards, not even, it's 24 hours of commenting, and
Right.
and it's pretty much just entertaining. It's just entertaining an audience that wants to listen and want and it's this confirmation bias. It's
Mhm.
like I want to listen to what I think I thought was right.
Mhm.
So you find that in many outlets. You find that in CNN. You find it in Fox News as well. And then it's sad to see it because as journalists, one is always raised and thought that taught at school that the New York Times, the Washington Post, the big outlets, the Wall Street Journal, always tend to be objective, and it's always about the news, and it's always about, those newspapers were always the role model. But then what you see once you're working as a journalist, once you share a press briefing room with the CNN reporter, with the New York Times reporter, with the Bloomberg reporter, is what you end up realizing is that every outlet has its own agenda.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Point. Like the New York Times, despite them saying that it's all about facts and it's all about the numbers and that they go line by line every time they publish something, that's a lie. That's not true. They have their agenda, and clearly the Washington Post has its agenda too.
Mm-hmm.
I was able a couple of months ago to not now, a couple of years ago, sorry, to do this internship at the Post, and yes, it's true. They're very prepared, and they always try to give voices to both sides of sort of like of the news. Uh, but at the end, there is an agenda. At the end, there are things that cannot get published or cannot make the headline as they should. And yeah. So there is that point. Everyone has its own agenda, but also the agenda is always it's getting more and more contaminated by the need of entertaining and by the need of becoming a tendency now on social media, on TV. So there's always a need of entertaining some way, creating this shock
Right.
of news readers and stuff. But yeah,
Yeah.
you were gonna come up with a question. So I
Well,
interrupted.
yeah. I mean, I would say that one of the reporters that for oil and gas stuff I follow is named Sergio Chapa. I always recommend his stuff because if you go read his stuff, it's I'm not saying he's perfect, but he does a good job of just Ryan Ray came out and said this da 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 da, and it's very much to the point. And sometimes you'll have an opposition quote from some person who disagrees or whatever if he's talking about that or not. But it's generally speaking just pretty much the news. And we talked about this in the newsletter the other day, and I talked about Tom Cotton's deal. And so first off, if the New York Times wants to publish an op-ed with Tom Cotton, we should all know that they are publishing something that's going against what their editorial board believes. Like that's the purpose of the op-ed. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is, if you don't want to subscribe to the New York Times or be critical, I think all those things are fine. However, if I'm going to debate, and I don't agree with what Tom Cotton said, I'm a libertarian, so that's kind of like, ooh, I don't know, bub. Before we start talking about this stuff, we gotta have a long conversation. I'm not, but I'd much rather argue Tom Cotton than I would Ryan Ray, right? Because Tom Cotton actually has the ability to influence this decision. And so I did. So part of the outrage is like, well, okay, if you think what he's saying is bad or wrong, that's a separate issue. But I would much rather engage the debate with Tom Cotton than I would a regular commentator like myself, because Tom Cotton actually has the ability to either do or not do or influence a president or whatever. It might run for president one day. So I think that it's like, okay, if you don't want him, that's fine. But also let's just keep in mind here, he actually is giving you an insight to what the leadership thinks, whether you're Republican or Democrat or not. And that's, to me, there's a lot of value there that kind of got lost in that narrative. And to the Times, credit, or if you didn't like it, they published a scathing editorial the next day calling what he said a fascist. I was like, well, okay, so we've got two sides of the coin there. There's a lot more nuance, but so I didn't understand some of the outrage. Because it's like, well, okay, I really do want to know what Tom Cotton says, because he actually is passing laws. That is kind of an important thing for me to understand. And it feels like we have kind of gotten stuck in this binary thinking trap where either you're for something or against something, and you can't stop, and you can't just say, well, what about this, or let's nuance this, or and so those are all things from a person who where I'm trying to be, which is commentating where I think making it clear where I think this is what's been factually reported. This is we're kind of speculating on, and try to nuance that in a careful manner, because ultimately it's fine to speculate, but we all need to be clear that speculation is just that, it's speculation, whereas facts are different. And so anyways,
Yeah.
well, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Yeah, no. One of the things that the open was that journalists criticized the Times for was the fact that the op-ed didn't allow comments at the end. So it was like, all right, fine, you're gonna let him, state his opinion, but why don't you open the comment section? Because it's like, yeah, I mean, people have the
Okay, I
right.
didn't know that. Yeah, I didn't hear about the comment thing. So yeah, sure, open the comments up. If that's, I don't know what their standard policy is. So if it's open the comments up, then yes, I would agree with that. I
Yeah,
didn't know that, I didn't know I didn't know the comments were
but
closed.
no, but you're right. I mean, there are some facts. I would call it. Of course, the other version is what other journalists say is those facts are not right. He's stating his opinion on facts that are not right, and then that therefore uh, he cannot come up with an opinion based on facts that are inaccurate. So because that's not a good output, and if the New York Times is going to stick to its very demanding standards, then the, at least the facts should be right. But anyways, that's a whole different debate, and I agree. There should be a counterpart. There should be a different voice. But yeah, that's a whole
Well,
different.
yeah, we'll have to get you back on. We'll parse that out because a lot of meat on that bone. Okay, so one of the things I was saying earlier is I know privately, and I'll say it publicly now. I've given credit to my thesis about China and their Belt and Road Initiative. Is I'm very skeptical compared to other folks who follow China about the long term viability of it. And that I got that idea originally from talking to you, and part of the reason I wanted to get you on today was because you talked about the frustration in Colombia and Venezuela and maybe some other spots I don't remember about how the Chinese are coming in with their Built the Road initiative, and the elites, the government level, maybe the business owners. I don't know who. I'll let you kind of parse it out. They're all turning out really well, but you have the average folks who are they're still starving and they can't make end meet, and they're still living in extreme poverty. And since then, one of the things I thought about, so since you kind of brought that up, I'd heard some of those rumblings from the African side, which is kind of a little bit more where I've kind of dealt with, but I haven't heard it parsed out like you did, and kind of went back to some of my folks in Africa and kind of read some stuff there, and it felt like the sentiment was the same there. I just hadn't ever understood the framing as you had framed it, which kind of led me to believe that if you talk about emerging markets, well, love them or whatever you want to think about them, they do have they're more likely to become unstable than a first world nation as far as overchange of government stuff. And so it kind of led me to think, well, everyone touts China's Belt and Road Initiative as the kind of the linchpin for all they have, and actually it's a liability. And if you saw, China just paused the debt for 77 nations around the world because of the impact of the COVID, and I think part of that's because plenty of these emerging markets were coming out saying, "Yeah, we're not going to pay you back. You're cheating us or whatever." So maybe just at a high level, kind of tell us from your perspective, folks that in South America, if you want to talk about Colombia or Venezuela, kind of mix it together. Just Belt and Road Initiative. Maybe if there's good or bad, just kind of walk the folks who aren't familiar with what it actually looks like on the ground through, so they can have a better framework, if you will.
Sure. Well, the Bolton Road Initiative is this plan, to from Xi Jinping's government to have more presence around the world. It was first thought for Asia and part of Europe. China wanted to expand its power. Now its soft power and its trade power in Europe and in Asia and part of Africa. But then it expanded, and then it's present pretty much all around the world. That Belt and Road Initiative. Uh, so what the Chinese government has done is that they've signed um, memorandums with Latin American countries on acknowledging sort of that plan that the Chinese have in the region. And what's going on in Latin America right now is that um, for good and for bad, we've been forgotten, but we're not as important for the largest countries and the largest powers, the biggest powers in the world. The U.S. yes has had influence in Latin America. They've had investments uh, and so on. They of course in the 80s. There is a lot of history that shows how politically they really got their footprint in Latin America, helping right-wing dictators to achieve powers such as some Pinochet in Chile, and La Junta in Argentina, and in Brazil too, and then in Venezuela it happened as well. So that this was part of a plan, the Plan Condor, the Condor Plan that the U.S. had established to sort of like eliminate socialism in South America. And I'm telling you all this because it was only the U.S. that was present in South America for the past century. Now it's been always our benchmark. It's been always our big brother. If we want to trade and if we want to export or import, our trading partner would be the U.S. No, rarely Europe, but lastly China. And then 20 years ago, things have changed completely, and the Chinese have just entered the region. I would say 20, 30 years ago, very silently, Ryan. No one has noticed how big of an influence they've constructed and gathered in South America. And I can give you dozens of examples. One of them, starting with the metro of Bogota. Bogota, the capital of Colombia, has 14 million people in the city, and it didn't have a metro. No, so we've been trying to build that metro for at least 15 years, and it's always corruption always gets in the way of the project, and then it never happens. We never start. All of a sudden, a couple of months ago, last year, the Chinese arrive. They have better prices, better infrastructure, and they offer to deliver the project much faster than the Mexican, the Spanish, and I think the French who are also trying to get the contract from the government. The Chinese win. The Chinese win the contract. Is the largest infrastructure contract in Colombia. It's going to be about $22 billion to build the first two lines of metro in Bogota. And this happened. The contract was assigned a week after the president of Colombia flew to Beijing and to have this bilateral meeting with Xi Jinping. And that's only the case of Colombia. Colombia is not the largest partner of China in Latin America. Brazil is the largest partner of China, and that's a lot because of the metals and the all the metals that Brazil offers to China, and there is and that's been a crucial and a huge point in the Latin American China relationships. The role Brazil has played. That's because Bolsonaro, when he entered, when he was elected, he said that he was going to exclude China from his equation, that he was not going to include them in its development plan. And then as soon as he got in power, the first thing he said, it's like, we have to work with all our allies. That includes China. And then he said, and then he revealed, by the way, China is our largest trade and economic partner. And China is actually right now the largest trade and economic partner, not only of Brazil, but also of Argentina, of Chile, of Peru, of Ecuador, of Paraguay, of Colombia, of Venezuela. In Central America, they're all around building ports. They have at least, in Central America, they have at least 40 ports. They have ports, they build them, and they have control over the data and over a lot of logistics, because it's not only building a port, it's maintaining the port. It's when you sell an airplane, it's like, it's cool. You buy the airplanes from the Americans. All right, fine. But then you need the trains, and then you need the parts of the planes, and then you need the maintenance of the plane. And that's also provided by the person who actually either sold you the plane, or in this case, will build the port, and build the infrastructure. So Chinese, to give you more example, are the ones who are constructing a lot of infrastructure in Costa Rica. And then there was this huge problem in Costa Rica between the government and the Chinese company who was building, I think it was a railroad. And then the Costa Rican government comes up and says, you know what, you're just infringing all our laws, you're not fulfilling your contracts, your duties, and especially you're not taking care of the environment. And Costa Rica is a very environmental sort of like, now they really try to take care of their environment. Now that's what they sell. That's part of the tourism package, that they sell. And the Chinese were just destroying the whole thing. And then they sued them. And then there's like, Yeah, we don't abide by the Costa Rican laws. We have nothing to do with it. We only we only have to meet and we only have to respect the Chinese laws because we actually work for the Chinese government. So that's to give you sort of an example of how the Chinese um, act and how they try to implement to enforce sort of the rule of law in the countries where they go and invest. And this connects with the example I was giving you about the presence of the US in the 70s and 80s in Latin America. It connects because right now the US has left a void in Latin America. They're not investing anymore as they used to. They're not as present as they used to. So that void has been fulfilled by the Chinese, and they are just putting the rules because no one else is offering any sort of investment or any sort of development in the region. The only ones are the Chinese, and they're bringing their conditions and they're bringing their workers because many of them, in the case of Venezuela, for example, when they go and invest in oil camps or exploiting the gold and the mining and the copper and the coltan that Venezuela has. Venezuela is one of the richest countries in terms of uh, gold and in terms of energy and it's insane how rich they are. Uh, the Chinese are just going there and then just doing whatever they want, whatever they want. And on top of it, what they do is that not only they invest in all these projects, they bring their own labor force. So they bring the Chinese from China to work in these camps, but also they give the government money, loans, very cheap loans, very cheap interests. So that's when Mike, remember Tillerson, the former state
Hmm.
Secretary of State, he used to say the Chinese are just implementing the strategy of debt diplomacy. So it's what they were doing all around Latin America. They were just offering and offering cheap loans with cheap interest rates to developing countries, to emerging countries. And then with those loans and with these investments, they would just acquire so much power and so much political power and economic power that then it's a new way of just being an empire. And this is part of the Belt and Road Initiative, right? It's worrying for countries such as Colombia, such as Peru, that in the 60s, 17s, and 80s they were somehow dependent on what the U.S., the big brother, that empire had to say in the region. Nowadays, we just switched empires. We just
Hmm.
switched powers. Now it's what the Chinese want to say, and what the Chinese want to do.
So one of the things I've been talking to, I had some meetings with some ambassadors from Africa earlier this year, and we're kind of working through some of the issues over there. I'm curious what your thoughts are for South America, um, or at least the countries that you're aware with. But if you look at U.S. companies, because a lot of the same things you're describing are similar problems in Africa. And so one of the things I've been trying to work through and express to these ambassadors from Africa, these various African nations, is that, if you remember, I brought this up at the embassy in Beijing, is that it's very hard, especially for someone, business my size, which is very small and insignificant, to go work in a foreign nation because the laws are very complex. Not only what as far as tax and stuff here, you get down there and you have concerns about, okay, well, if I got to go to court in Colombia, you know, do I get a fair trial? Can I actually afford an attorney? How do I vet a good attorney? Right, you start compounding these issues, and whereas China, what they've done on some level is their government, as you were talking about at the beginning, they're just saying, "Hey, we're going to meet with the leadership of this country, and then we're going to give you guys basically unlimited dollars." And so the risk is far less than it is for an American business. And kind of what I've been sketching out, at least for these African nations, is you know the problem with Africa on some levels has been is that these large multinational corporations come in that that probably actually have more money than the African nation itself does, right? Like they actually just have more money than the nation does. So they actually have a huge advantage over these smaller African countries. And so, they have teams of lawyers, they can take them to court, they know how to play the game. Um, And what happens is the same thing happens with China on some level. Is they come in, they bring in their own people, they set up some school, the school never works, and then they leave and they're filthy rich, and the people aren't better off. Is it possible, or is there a way to work with people who are, I say, small businesses, medium sized businesses, not the Exxon Mobil's of the world? There are some projects that only ExxonMobil can do, but you know what I'm saying. But for other types of projects where you say, okay, listen, um, Colombia, Venezuela. Venezuela is a little bit different, but Colombia, just take that as an example. We're going to set up a system in which we're going to guarantee, I say guarantee, I ain't saying that word, but guarantee in air quotes, these set of rules for you guys. And they have a sunset clause. So your batch one, we'll call it batch one. Here's the laws that ensure the labor, the laws that ensure, trade, taxes, all of the things that businesses are worried about. They're going to write laws that have a sunset clause, 10, 15 years. And then as you get into it a year, 2, 3 years, you kind of see some of the court cases and some of the frictions. You say, okay, well, over here we didn't address this, and so over here we're going to address this. So then the next set, we've tweaked the laws, and so now you have a second batch. The second batch comes in under the new set of laws, and they have a sunset clause on them as well. And you kind of go through that iteration 3, 4, 5 times, and by the end of it, what you've done is you've brought in businesses that cannot, they don't have the resources to bring in all of their own people, so they have to work with other local talent. The government has kind of given a way to make sure that these businesses aren't going to come down there and get swindled or make a mistake and lose everything because they don't understand the complex nature of the Colombian legal system or whatever. And maybe the early on people are getting a slight advantage, but they do have to partner with the local people on the ground, which means local people begin to do stuff. And by the end of this, 6, 7 iteration, not only do you have um, laws that have kind of been that are phasing out, so whatever the first set is, they're gone because they're sunset. But you've been able to kind of track the progress of what does work and what doesn't work. Whereas it seems like even in America, we something happens and we just immediately jump from one extreme to the other. And sometimes that's warranted. A lot of times, jumping from one extreme to the other, while the other extreme might be where you want to be or close to where you be, the jump is what causes it not to work out because there's just practical steps and realities that you have to get to. And so I'm curious your thoughts on policies and things like that. Is that a crazy idea or maybe possible? Not as far as whether it be implemented or not, but would something like that kind of start to fix that gap for what you're seeing in South America, where people could go compete with China if the local governments were willing to work on
Yeah.
something like that?
Step in. Well, yeah, two things. First, I was reading the other day this magazine about the Latin American relationships with China. They're going through a phase two of the relationships because when the Chinese arrived 15, 20 years ago, they arrived with the same sort of methods they were using in Africa. Now it's like we put the money, we put the conditions, and we leave all this like environmental footprint, and we don't care. We don't have to assume the consequences of our actions. We just exploit the natural resources. Because by the way, it's a very mercantilistic relationship. It's like it's the same thing. We go to the countries, we take the natural resources out, and then we sell you guys back the processed good, or the processed service that we get out of your traditional or yeah, the say, for example, in the case of whatever gold, they just buy raw gold, they fund it, they just make it into jewelry and then go back to the country and sell it back, and then just to give you an example, that's what they do. They just take the raw materials out and then give us the processed goods, and try to sell them back, which is we don't win a lot in that sort of trade relation. So but going back to your point about sort of like considering what laws can a business, a small size or medium sized business can sort of relate on, if they wanted to invest in the country, considering sort of the context of power, economic and political power the Chinese have. I would say two things. First, there's a rule of law in Latin America, much more established than there is in Africa. So governments are a little bit more established, have more sort of like a traditional democratic sort of history that yes, it has some weight, it has some influence when dealing with companies, private companies that try to invest in the region. Also, in the case of Colombia, in the case of Chile, and in the case of Mexico, these countries are now part of the OECD. The OECD is it's to put it like this: it's this group of developed economies that operate under uh, the same good public policy laws, and those laws and those measures um, help private investment in those countries. So it's like let's all play by the same rules. So if you're part of this group, if you're part of this club, the good public policy club, then you would have to fulfill these requirements and operate under this condition. So Colombia, Chile, Mexico, and soon Argentina. Argentina wants to become part of it too. Have to operate under this condition. So that gives the investor some sort of you know security if in the long run, because in the short run and in the field, it's different. It's different when you're in Washington, Ryan, when you're in Geneva, when you're in Paris, signing this very fancy agreement, and saying that from now on we are going to operate under these conditions, and we are going to fight against poverty and reduce poverty and reduce climate change emissions and all these things. It sounds very nice, but then on the ground, there where it happens is completely different. And then when a medium-sized company, say American or Canadian or whatever, wants to go to a very rich part of the country in Colombia or in Brazil or in Argentina, and they want to invest, they have to deal with the local government, and it's very different dealing with the president, the ministers in Washington, than dealing with the local government of, I don't know, in Bolivia, Santa Cruz de la Sierra. They have a lot of mining, and a lot of companies are interested in investing there. And then you hear a lot of, yeah, it's investing in mining in Bolivia is very profitable. We should all go there and invest there. And then at the end of the day, when you see the real investment in mining in Bolivia, you see that there's this guy called Marcelo Claure. He was actually the former CEO of Sprint Communications, who just recently merged with the T-Mobile. This guy owns pretty much 80% or 70%
Right.
of the mining in Bolivia. And of course, he's Bolivian. He knows how it works. He knows how local government works. He knows how things really work there in the local communities. So in the local communities, you have the Chinese who come and who actually know how it works. You need to bribe them. You need to give them money.
Mm-hmm.
You need to, you need to bribe the local politicians, so you have the permit to build that dam or to build that whatever railroad that it's going to somehow disrespect all the indigenous laws or
Mm-hmm.
whatever national park that's in there, or the and that's how it works locally. So those 2 points I wanted to bring to the conversation is that yes, it's true that in a macro level we have all these agreements that somehow picture the countries, the emerging market economies in Latin America as like viable countries to go and invest. But at the same time, when you're actually on the field, it's completely different, and that hasn't changed.
And yes, I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. That I'm glad you nuanced that out. That's a great point. That's part of the thing that I've tried to stress with some of my African friends is we need, not wide sweeping changes. We need small, nuanced policies that can be tested in a small group. Because listen, we all know, we can all name bills, whether Republican, Democrat, or libertarian, that were you're like, I like that, and then you're like, oh my gracious, I did not know that was going to happen. It's like, okay, well, sometimes those things happen because they were constructed to happen that way. But there's plenty of times where things are happening. It's like, oh, whoa. So yeah, that's part of the thing I've been trying to talk to these guys about is small group, test groups, if you will, or batches. That's what I call them. It's not open to anyone. It's limited. It's small. We've worked these things out where we can kind of study these things because it feels like, at least on the African side, that it's just one extreme to the other, back and forth. So I don't know how tight your timeline is. We only got a few minutes left, so if you just want to make you aware of that. But I want to talk about COVID a little bit. One of my concerns with the COVID, whether you're pro shutdowns or anti shutdowns or wherever you stand on that issue aside, my concern, and I've seen this, is that sometimes America, whether it means to or not, it exports out its ideals to emerging markets. You'll see this if you go to, at least again, you can speak to South America, but at least in Africa, you'll go and you'll find people who have, 2 or 3 degrees, and there's no jobs for anyone. It's like, well, why'd you get the degree? It's like, well, that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to go to college, supposed to get a master's, supposed to get this. Like, well, sure, if there's jobs, but there's no jobs. Maybe you should work on. Maybe we should talk about vocational jobs, something like that. And so you kind of see where America, again, whether intentional or good intentions, doesn't really matter, for this conversation at least, that these ideals get exported out. And with the COVID stuff, America was shut down. Whether we did it too soon or not, all that aside, and other large nations were shut down. And my concern was for the emerging markets is like, well, guys, hold on. We shut down these emerging markets. There are already people who are borderline starving today. If you shut down these markets, you might see a terrible outcome. And I know on some, I think it was the other day I looked at, it was Panama, maybe there was a report in the Wall Street Journal, or El Salvador, maybe. Anyways, talking about the difficulties they're facing. So I'm just curious, what have you guys seen in South America with your reporting? Have the shutdowns, cause more stress than maybe you would see here in America, where, obviously we're a more wealthy nation, but that's my concern. I'm just curious how that's played out in these South American nations.
Yeah, well, it's very interesting because I would say that the problems, to sort of summarize my answer, the problems that we had before were catalyzed and grew even more with the COVID. So, to give you an example, inequality in Colombia. I think Colombia is the after Haiti, the most unequal country in the world. So we have very rich people, but at the same time, very, very, very poor people. And that problem specifically of inequality just uh, grew in dimensions that one can't believe. I mean, there was this saying of course, we all had like social distancing here in the US, and we had the quarantine, and we had to lock ourselves in our house and in our houses, and that was pretty shocking for a lot of people. But then in Colombia, I was talking to some colleagues, some journalists, and we were saying it's like, not only in Colombia, in Latin America, it's like, yeah, but staying at home, it's actually, that's a luxury. It's like people don't have homes, and people cannot afford to stay home. I would say 70% of people cannot afford to stay home in Colombia. They have to go out and find somewhere, somehow, some money to eat, to give some food to their families,
Yeah.
to actually not starve, So this COVID thing has just potentialized all the problems we had, and it's it's just yeah, exponent. It just exposed much more the poverty and the inequality that, according to economists and according to
Mhm.
Harvard PhDs, it was we were fighting, and we were eliminating poverty in Colombia and in many other countries in Latin America. And then COVID comes, and then all of a sudden you realize that if you had somehow eliminated poverty, you just realize that it was a matter of statistics. You were just playing with numbers, because the reality is still there, and it's there more present than ever. People are very poor. There's a lot of inequality. They have no access to health. They have no access to education. They have no access to like basic needs, basic shelter. And then you have a country that, and this phenomenon is happening all around Latin America, and all around emerging markets in the world, even
Mhm.
here in the US.
Yeah.
Then the streets become more insecure because you have a lot of people who need to go and eat and to find something to do. They cannot stay at home, first because they don't have homes, second because they're starving. So of course insecurity rises, and then what my worry is, and here comes a point of debate with you, considering your libertarian sort of like standpoint.
Mhm.
The response of the government after seeing this whole crisis is not trying to provide more food, provide more opportunities, provide more economic relief. Although, of course, we've heard about all these economic plans, which, in my view, are not working at all. And at the end, rich companies are staying are just ending up with a big chunk of the money and not actually translating those opportunities to the workers. But anyways, that's a whole different conversation. But what's happening is that because of all this insecurity, the ride from COVID, then the response of the government is, no, we need more policemen and more security out there in our streets because it's getting out of control. It's like, so not only you're not helping the true problem get solved, but you're just creating another problem of just more sort of public officers and policemen and soldiers on the streets trying to control something that you cannot control. Right? It's really hard to control when someone's hungry and
Yes.
has family at home asking for food. What are
Hmm.
you going to control there? You can put the only way of doing that. It's pretty much just killing or disappearing the person. You know, it's like
Hmm.
I'm very worried about how the governments are in emerging countries are facing this crisis, because it's not, and on top of it they don't have the resources either. So it's like
Right.
we don't have the resources to actually finance these people to actually provide the food they need or the health they need. What are we going to do to keep this under control? Let's put some policemen on the streets. All right, but still we don't have enough, because we don't have enough resources to pay enough police to be on the streets and keep things safe. So things are getting out of control very, very, very fast. You know, when you see in the case of Colombia, we've been suffering this migration crisis coming from Venezuela. So not only you have poverty of Colombians, which it's a lot, but also you have the Venezuelan migration, which is right now 2.5 million Venezuelans in Colombia. You know,
Hmm.
so and that in only 3 years we've got all these people. So that has just complicated things even more for Colombians, and then things just get out of control really easy, and it's very it's chaotic what's happening right now. And then the governments, because of all this like health situation, are forced to keep their people inside. And what I'm starting to sort of like think is that this policy of maintaining the quarantine, it's more than actually because of the health and the risk and the health risk associated to COVID. I think it's more of a measure of like, it's a public policy measure. It's like we keep people inside to try to control them, because if we leave, if we start opening very fast, there's so much need and there's so much, you know, poverty and inequality that things are going to get out of control very fast. So if we were to open, we would, the governments would have to do it in phases, not how people want actually, you know. So anyways,
Tell me, do you need to go, or do you have a few more minutes? Because we're
I
up.
have more minutes. I have more minutes.
Okay, okay.
How many do you have?
We'll go a few more, but if you hit the clock, just tell me. We'll cut off.
Sure. Perfect.
So yeah, a lot of things you said there. So first off, one of the things that that I think that has to be, and Americans need to hear this, is that we have to quit thinking that what life like is in America is what it's like everywhere else. And it's hard if you haven't been to emerging markets or third world countries to kind of visualize the complexities, and you are far more in tune with this stuff than I have. I've been to Honduras and Nicaragua, to the not to the tourist spots, but to the to the on the ground where they're living the huts, and you can start to see the complexity of the issues and all that stuff. And you start, it's pretty quick. But if you shut people down, these people are living day to day now. Like, how there's no way that this is going to end well, unless we're going to start sending in food trucks from wherever to do it. So it's not, but most Americans just don't get exposed to that, and that's kind of a deficit. To your point, though, and I think we're at a point now, and this is kind of, it's sad and frustrating. I think we're at a point now that where, especially if you look at, kind of the political climate in America, is that, you know, either either you are, like I said earlier, kind of binary thinking. You're either for this movement or you're against this movement. And if you're for this movement, you're the greatest thing ever. If you're on my side, if you're against this movement, you're the worst person ever, and you want people to die. And it's one of the things I appreciated about the China trip was we had a lot of spirited debates and back and forth and pushing and talking. And as I was saying earlier, I thought about some of those conversations we had about schools, particularly, and some of the things I said. I didn't say I didn't. I don't think it fits of a root or anything. There's just, I just thought, gosh, I should have said this, or when he said that, I should have responded that way. And part of that is because I hadn't thought through some of the objections you had, and I wasn't, we're kind of in the moment, kind of going back and forth. Um, I say all that to say that it feels like today that we've lost the ability to say, listen, here's what I think would be good for Colombia. And here's what you think that'd be good for Colombia. And then it, we might disagree, but it doesn't always mean that there's a racist motivation or that there is, ill will or malintent or whatever. And we just can't sit down and start talking about these issues because they are very complicated. And as you pointed out, the problem with libertarianism is most libertarians say, well, hey, we want X, Y, and Z, and I think that there's a lot of valid for a lot of libertarian arguments because I identify as libertarian. However, I also realize that to get from where we're at to where we want to be is a lot of slow moving steps. And I think I just kind of point to some of the stuff that you point out is there's a wide sweeping policy change. Everyone's locked down. Well, now you create starving people. Well, you respond to that, a wide sweeping change, which is now more police. And then you kind of go back and forth these big changes. And it's like, well, in America, I can't speak to what the conversation was in South America, but America was, well, if you wanted to go out in America, it's because you wanted to kill people. Basically, you were essentially, pro murdering everyone. It's like, well, I mean, maybe some people think that, but maybe some people just, they actually need to go to work. They can't survive on these dollars. If you take that to Colombia, where that's a reality for whatever percentage of the population, a lot higher than here in the U.S. How do we work through these issues where there are contentious and they are tough, and understand that I don't know what percentage. I hate to put percentages on stuff, but most people genuinely want what they believe is best for everyone, whether it is or not. Separate discussion, but there's not always this sense of um, um, racism or moral
Yeah.
superiority or country stuff, because all that stuff drives me crazy. I can't stand um, those kind of ideals. One thing that I said on the trip and said multiple times, I got a wife and 4 kids. I want that guy in Colombia who has a wife and 4 kids to live a better life. I don't want him. I know what it's like to look at your kids and they're hurting or they're in pain, they're suffering. Now, it doesn't mean that me and you, Cristobal, if we sit down, we would agree on what the best thing is, but I don't want ill for that man and his wife and kids. I don't want that. How do we get to a point where we can talk about these things that's not just so heated and it's just, it's conversations where we're trying to work together.
Well, look, man, Ryan, first of all, I want to thank you again for inviting me to your show. Because, I mean, despite as you say, our heated conversations and debate we had, at the end of the conversations, and even when I used to go back to my room at the hotel and think about things we had talked during our trips, our bus trips from I don't know, from the airport to the hotels or whatever. uh, I was like, it's interesting because it's so easy to take the conversation, to reduce the conversation to just like, oh well, Ryan, he's from Texas and Texans think like this, and they don't care about the rest of like Latinos or African Americans or whatever. And it's so easy just to put you on a label, to put a label on you, and then just say, you know what, there's no discussion here because you're like this and that. And I think opening the space for me, a Colombian who has
Mhm.
perhaps very little connection to your world in Texas and your energy business and
Mhm.
stuff. It's pretty valuable. Really, it's really. And I remember you telling me, inviting me to the show when we were saying goodbye to each other
Mhm.
in Shanghai. It was like it's very nice to have the spaces, and I totally agree. In fact, couldn't agree more on how sensible and how paranoid we are about having different opinions. Because every time we have a different opinion, then we just go ahead and label the other. And it's like it's I through personal experiences and I've realized that it's from the it's based on the differences that we can actually sit down and argue something that might give us some feedback and actually make us grow in terms of, I don't know, personally and professionally. It's when I sit with a different person that thinks completely different. It's then when I grow and when I actually, you know,
Mhm.
rethink my ideas and rethink the assumptions I had. But nowadays you're right. We just tend to put labels on those who think differently, and we feel so scared about our arguments and our beliefs being uh, um, contradicted and being yeah being questioned,
Mhm.
that we just end up just it's easier just to qualify and to judge someone of being racist or of being whatever, yeah, a Texan or a Colombian or a Mexican. It's just so easy to just put that label and to avoid trying to understand the argument behind it and actually
Mhm.
discussing about it. And that was very, that was the good thing, that even when I got pissed for stupid reasons while we were having our debates in the bus, in the trips we had in China, at the end I was like, it's so nice that at the end you can actually argue with the guy, because this guy just it's about just bringing up arguments that would test your knowledge and actually test your ideas and your assumptions, and that's very valuable. But to the point with I don't know, to try to connect that with the Cotum OPED and
Mhm.
with all the things that are going on right now in the US. I would say it's it's um it's a fake extreme, it's like a fake polarization that we're going through. And I think if we want to overcome that sort of like forced fake politically motivated polarization that we're living in, from Democrats and Republicans, I think it's important to go back to the fundamentals. When you were open about how libertarian you were, and your political views and your economic views and your view about the government, and you had that fundament. When I say being more fundamental about things, it's not being extremist about things, it's just
Mhm.
having some fundaments that I can put on the table and then exchange them with you. But then when you have no fundament, what is it that you're going to put on the table? What is it that you're going to bring to the debate, aside from being very sensible and just feeling that any sort of idea that contradicts what you think would just put you in risk, and then your response to it would be just to judge others as a different extremist, and yeah, it's just so easy to put that label as like, yeah, it's because you're a Jew, it's because you're a Muslim, it's because you're so yeah, I know it's very interesting to have those arguments and have those debates. But I would say, if anything, if we were to think about a solution, perhaps it would be just go back to the fundamentals. Go back to your democratic or republican fundamentals, go
Mhm.
back to your economic fundamentals as a capitalist, as a capitalist country. But then when you look at what's going on right now in capitalism right now, and I don't go against capitalism, and I'm extending myself in this answer, but Ryan, what I'm trying to say is that, all right, let's be capitalist, but then let's give the companies, this medium and small size companies, the opportunity to compete. Let's not have 4, 5, 6 companies that are just controlling the whole market, that are not allowing companies are not allowing competition to evolve, and competitors to actually grow in the market. Because what they end up doing, it's either I'll buy you out, or I'll just uh, because of my skill and because the power I have in the market, I would just reduce my prices and do this marketing strategies that would completely drive you out of the market as a medium or small size company. And that's not true capitalism. That's not allowing a capitalist system to develop. Yeah. So I don't know. It's just, I think it's important to go back to the fundamentals, no, to fundamentals.
Yeah, it's funny you said that because we don't spend a ton of time on the newsletter or we don't plan to spend a lot of time on newsletter on kind of the current event of the day, but we did tackle the George Floyd deal a little bit, and we try to point out a couple things. First off, that I don't know of anyone. No, that's just in my circle. I'm not saying it in the U.S., but I don't know anyone who saw the George Floyd video and didn't think that the cop, Chauvin or whatever his name is, should have been arrested and prosecuted to whatever the full extent of the law is. So I'm not a legal attorney. I don't know if that's first degree, second degree, third degree manslaughter. I don't know, but whatever it is, I don't know anyone who does who disagrees with that. I haven't heard that position out there. Now I've heard, now we advocated he gets a fair trial because we all want a fair trial because that's exactly what Mr. Floyd didn't get. He didn't get a fair trial, right? He didn't get that opportunity. But a fair trial, it seems like, would lead to a conviction. But one of the things that we tried to parse out was, and I'm curious because you're talking about thinking through this, is Nate wrote a post talking about what we know versus what we don't know. And we got a lot of interesting responses. Some people hated it, some people loved it. And the irony is we were just simply trying to point out that we do know what we saw in the video. We all saw it. We can talk about what we saw. We can analyze what we saw, and we all seem to agree on that. Where we end up fighting over is why we think he did it. Was he a racist? Was he arrogant? Was he, stoned or whatever? Why that cop did what he did? We don't actually know that. But what happens is we start just getting in these heated arguments over that instead of going to your point, the fundamentals. Well, we all agree he committed a crime. Now, I don't know, maybe first degree, second degree, third degree. I don't actually know the legal definitions in the state to actually speak to that, but I'm happy to hear talks on it and learn. But we skip over what we agree on and just go straight into the speculation debate over why he did it. Now, I have my thoughts on what he was thinking and doing. You may have your thoughts. Maybe you're right. Maybe I'm wrong. But we don't. We just don't fundamentally know. Is it part of a larger trend? I think that's a good discussion to have. But I think you hit on something there. Is we talk about the fundamentals. We've just lost the ability to say, in this case, we actually agree on the major issue for George Floyd, which was he was killed in police custody, and this guy should go on trial. That's everyone seems to agree on that. And then these other issues are very important, and I'm not trying to say that they're not important. I'm simply saying those discussions we got to understand that. Okay, now we're okay. Well, why are the cops doing this? How often is it? Are they over targeting, under targeting? Those are all great discussions that we'd have. We want, as you know, from talking with me at least, that the last thing I want to see is the state overreaching and taking people's rights and unfairly targeting them. I don't want to have that ever happen to anyone. And so those are great discussions to have. But it's like, man, it's so frustrating because it felt like this time we had a chance where large portions of the country, at least publicly, kind of all agreed, and we went to the part where we disagreed for various reasons, and we spent a lot of time arguing over those issues when we could have probably found some unity over, as you say, maybe the fundamentals. I like how you describe that. And the other thing I was going to point out was, when you look at kind of this cross cultural deal, we're kind of torn. It seems right now because, as you say, he's a Texan or an old guy or whatever. I tell people I'm a free market libertarian, and I don't apologize for it because I don't want it to be uncomfortable. I want you to kind of know this is kind of where I stand at. And sometimes people will say, "Oh, well, who's going to build the roads?" I'm like, "Well, okay, I don't really. That's not all libertarians, okay, but that's fine. It's a fine thing to say." But one thing I have learned from dealing with people from foreign nations or different states in the Union of the United States is that we all do think differently. And so it's not necessarily that the label, obviously some labels are different than others, but it's not necessarily to say that, oh, he's a socialist, as long as you're engaging with what he's arguing with about socialism.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
There's a big difference there. Saying I'm a socialist, but if you're a socialist, then let's sit down and talk. We can. I'm not scared of debating a socialist. He could prove me wrong. Obviously, I don't think he will, but I'm happy to hear what he has to say and talk about it and say, well, I don't know, or yes, or whatever. So I think you're onto something there with the fundamental point.
No, I totally agree. And then when you mention how uh, a lot of the debate with all this Floyd issue has been focused on what divides us, I think that there comes the politics and the
Mhm.
politicians trying to create these divisions to take advantage of them. You know, I do have to disagree with this morning Trump's tweet about how, you know, it's like the protesters were very weak, and the National Guard was had a very easy time just you know ta- dispersing and then just finishing the protests
Mhm.
in the country. And it was a, I think he mentioned, there was just a trip to the park or something like that. It was
Yeah.
just very easy to deal with them, you know. And I was like, I think there's this division there that you want to create, and of course
Right.
it
Right.
it benefits the election. You know, at the end, people vote because they're scared or because they have anger. You know, and that's what really drive people to go out there and vote. You know, so you have to play with that, and you have to play with division. Division creates that. You know, division creates an enemy. The enemy creates the fear, and then you go out and vote. No, but then again, where are the fundamentals? Where let's sit down and let's debate this with arguments. You know, with, like, as you were mentioning, it's like, let's sit down with a socialist. No, let's
Mhm.
sit down with, and then hear him how the government should control everything. It's like, yeah, I
Mhm.
want to give us the argument. You know, and your arguments. But then that debate disappears. That debate disappears because what you have is a bunch of accusations and a bunch of labels and a bunch of uh, you know, Trump saying that they're all incitators
Mhm.
and they're part of Antifa, and then when you see in a lot of cases in Seattle, in Pittsburgh, in Baltimore, there were a lot of white extremists also in the marches, creating violence, breaking windows,
Mhm.
firing up things, you know, and then it's like, yes, you're just creating a lot of division, and the same thing goes with Democrats. You know, Democrats create, it's just a play of it's a game of dividing, and then the debate's over. The debate, and then what you see on CNN and what you see on Fox and what you see on many and on NBC and CBS and a lot of media channels is debates that are not about debating the argument, but
Mhm.
about who comments harder and who's more angry while commenting, you know, and who screams harder and who. But you're not actually debating over the issue. It's
Right.
debating over something that creates, entertains, you know, because it creates more fear or creates more rage, you know, and then we're not adding anything as journalists, you know.
Mhm.
It's funny because I've been investigating in the past days how large the Epstein problem, for example. This was the Miami Herald who actually investigated through all this and actually published the investigation, and then it was then picked up by the national outlets. A lot of big investigations and big things that happen in the country come from real journalism in
Yes.
small outlets, in small, medium-sized cities. You know,
Mhm.
well, remember in 2002 the Boston Globe scandal with the priests. You know, and
Mhm.
just taking advantage of kids sexually
Mhm.
and stuff. You know, so. And we don't look at those media outlets, and in fact, they are actually going bankrupt more and more. So we're losing that sort of like well-based, documented journalism that actually is based on facts. It's based on, okay, I'm going to go there, try to be objective, and actually investigate and work on it. And those are the stories that at the end, CNN, NBC, Fox ends up picking up and then creating big scandals out of it. But they don't stick to the investigations after they've made it a national news. No, so it's yeah, it's sad that the role that we're playing right now, because it's a role of entertaining, and it's a role of just generating more income, you know, through news.
Yeah. Well, I will say this, and I'll give you the last word. When I was with you guys, like I kept saying over and over again, when I'm around people who are more left leaning, I end up defending Trump. When I'm around my Republican friends, I'm end up crushing Trump, and that's the frustration with the Trump stuff. Is just use the George Floyd thing. I'll give you two examples, and we'll wrap up this. And I don't follow all his tweets or things. So I don't know what all's been said. I'm not saying that, but there was a press conference. He came out. I can't remember the day that Mr. Floyd died, Wednesday, Thursday, whatever it was. The next day or two, Trump came out and was pretty hard on, hey, this is not right. Either he had called the family or he's going to call the family. He was going to get the DOJ involved. And he really, all the Trumpian things you can say, he seemed to take the issue seriously and to say what everyone felt. Okay. I don't, that didn't seem to get a lot of press coverage. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. Now, then I don't know, the next day or day after, he's sitting there tweeting from the White House about how, the dogs and all this stuff. And it's like, okay, well, I don't know. Don't know. I, this is why it's hard to parse this out, because everyone's going to talk about that. And then, okay, so then you have that happen. And then the New York Times or whoever it was, Watch the Post, Trump hides in the bunker or whatever it was. Well, if you read the article, the Secret Service told him to go. I'm sure he could override them, but generally you follow the Secret Service's advice. So the Secret Service actually maybe go to the bunker, which is a nuanced perspective. We can talk about a lot of stuff, but the Secret Service, it seems by all accounts, is the one who encouraged him or forced him or however that works out. You might know the logistics of that better. But that was kind of the report. It's like, okay, well, the headline reads Trump goes to bunker when really the Secret Service is kind of the ones. And does it line up with this tweet or not? We can have that discussion. I don't know. And then, and so then he comes back out, and now next thing you know, he's walking across the street. And it's like, okay, well, then was there tear gas fired or not? And it's like, I do not want to defend the things that I disagree with him on. I don't want, and I want to defend him where I think he's right. But it's hard for me to see the media continually, and I'm talking about the non-Fox News. So Fox News would be the the opposite of this, obviously, but to continually always look for everything he does and to pound it and to omit when he came out and said, it's wrong, the DOJ, da da da. I was like, okay, well, man, that from my perspective, I'm not saying the DOJ should be involved or not because of more political beliefs, but if you're hey, this is what should happen, yeah, he kind of went all in on this thing. Um, does that deserve the same amount of news coverage as him tweeting out irrelevant tweets? Is for a matter of perspective. One's an actual policy thing, and one's a tweet thing. And I'm not trying to say he should be tweeting this stuff out either. I'm not trying to defend that. But you see the frustration I have is it's like, okay, I want to criticize his tweets, but if we're going to criticize his tweets, we have to criticize the coverage and the perspective, and those are the things I think that are divisive, that both sides are playing into. Trump plays into it 100%. The media plays into it 100%. And, from my perspective, it's like, depending on who I'm talking to, depends on my not my stance on Trump, but what I'm trying to talk about with Trump. Because if you're a big Trump supporter, then we're going to start talking about all the things that he's done that I think are terrible. And if you're a big Trump hater, well, we're probably going to talk about the things that you're not want to talk about. And at the end of the day, I just want to talk about what he actually did. Like, I don't want to spend my time parsing out, defending him here and criticizing him here because I'm talking to crowds. I just want to talk about what's the actual there. And it feels like people on the ground, Fox News. I don't want to. Someone pointed out earlier this week that I was mocking the media, and I didn't criticize Fox News. And in my mind, I had kind of lumped them in with the Trump supporters, so but I didn't parse them out. So to be clear, Fox News, New York Times, Washington Post, insert journals here, um, they all are, as you say, entertainment. They're playing this game, and it's so frustrating because it makes it where normal Americans cannot have conversations and say, well, you know what? He did say the DOJ thing. How about them tweets about the dogs? God, that was the stupidest thing ever. We just can't have those conversations anymore. For me, that's the biggest frustration. I will give you the last word, though, sir.
Well, yeah, it's frustrating to see how, as you were mentioning, the big media outlets are sort of like controlling the reality of the country and then just putting their lenses and they're filtering all the time this reality to sort of put some comment and some entertainment that could attract more and more audiences, while at the same time the small local outlets that are actually doing the hard work of going to the places, investigating, doing proper journalism are dying and are going bankrupt all the time. So what's frustrating, Ryan, is to see how we are lacking true and more than true reliable sources of information by losing this local outlets and local newspapers that are actually doing the proper journalism work, as opposed to the commenting that you see a lot in this big media outlets. So I think it's really sad and really dangerous for democracy to have such limited uh, sources of information. If look, right, you're a libertarian. I can say, and I'm not either Republican or Democrat. I'm not, whatever. I'm a foreign journalist here, but I can say I'm a Republican. But then, if I wanted to get informed, pretty much my option would be Fox News. So it's like the reality is condensed in like 4 or 5 media outlets, and I don't have any other options. And these media outlets are only giving me, well, mostly entertaining, mostly commenting, mostly debates that are not real debates, and I'm not getting informed. I'm just in the middle of this fight, listening to these comments that are not actually bringing me anything. So I think that is what worries me a lot, and I think that covers pretty much everything we've talked about here in the U.S. And I think it's a reality in Colombia as well, and in the world. You have very limited alternative sources of information that are actually doing the work of a journalist that, as you described very accurately, you tend to criticize Trump when you are with people who support him, and criticize and support him when you are with people who actually are against him. That's it's pretty much the role a journalist should play. It's like that's how it should be. It's like, it's not me. I should not assume a political position and then try to inflate and to grow the bad things that he has to an audience that is looking exactly for that. Why don't I question the audience that is actually expecting for me to talk good about Donald Trump and his policies? So anyways, I do have a question before we leave, man. and
Yes,
and
please do.
and, and considering the context, considering, in my opinion, such bad candidates that the US has for the next election.
Mhm.
uh, two guys that I don't think can articulate or sustain any sort of political stance, real political stance towards something, and can, are all about small sentences that create headlines and divide and create fear. And anyways, they're just looking for votes. But considering this sort of like now context, this weak political context here in the US, uh, are you guys going to perhaps thinking in the next election, the Libertarian Party come up with a candidate, or somehow try to influence this election somehow to recover that sort of third party position you
Mhm.
had at one point?
Yeah. So that's a great question. The Libertarian Party is, on some levels, just as dumb as all the other parties, because they become a political party and they kind of go against all the things that libertarians are for. As we were in Gary Johnson last time, and they just had the election. I can't remember who they nominated. The guy that I was kind of following along didn't get it, and then Amash put his hat in there and he's out. But so I think, to your point about the third party thing, um, and I said this during the Obama administration. Um, I said, okay, we live in a country where you could have either Kamala Harris or Ted Cruz run the country. Okay, I just picked those two senators because they're popular. Um, how does that work itself out? Because if you like Kamala Harris, you probably don't want Ted Cruz to win, and not by a small margin, a lot margin. Like, you really don't want Ted Cruz to win. And if you like Ted Cruz, you really don't want Kamala Harris to win. Like, those are kind of polar opposites. I just kind of used for the example. And when Trump won, which I did not think was going to happen, I was wrong about that. When Trump won, I thought you might begin to see this idea of, wait, if Trump's so bad, as someone pointed out, when he was a TV star, no one cared what he did or thought. It's just kind of entertaining. Now that you give him power, you're scared of him. I thought you might begin to see this conversation about, hey, either we need more parties involved, or we need to take power away from the Fed. You know, those kind of
Yeah.
conversations. Those conversations really haven't happened on a level that I'd kind of hoped to happen, just to kind of get that into the ethos of the country. So I'm not sure if the country is really ready to talk about a viable third party, or to consider that. I will say this: when you start talking about defunding the police department, which, just to be clear, I think a straight going from a police department to a no police department would be a terrible idea for a lot of reasons. And I'll just give one: how do you prosecute murderers? Because there are rules in place for evidence, and who's going to do that. So, anyways, um, but you start having that conversation. My hope is that we talk about the Overton window, that we start to say, hey, hold on. Like, this is a weird conversation. Is there other weird, I'm going to air quotes, are there other weird conversations we can have? Like, huh, why are we doing this? Or I'll give you one, Cristobal. If the Fed can just print money at will, why is anyone paying taxes? Like sales tax, state tax, property tax, income tax. Why is anyone paying taxes? Because the Fed apparently can print money without will. And according to Warren Buffett, it's never going to cost us. So hopefully we can have more conversations. And I'm not saying I agree with that sentiment or not. I'm saying hopefully we can begin to the spot where we can have more conversations that is outside of the Republican camp and it's outside the Democratic camp. And I think that, I don't know if it'll lead to a third party, um, where the libertarians will actually have some foothold, or another third party. But I think that's the actual idea, and that would probably manifest itself more, in Hood County, Texas, where I live, or some smaller area where you start to see them going, okay, we're going to start changing the laws here, and that might be um, the most likely outcome. But as it stands today, no, I do not think that the libertarians will run a a competent candidate in 2024 that will press the issue. I hope I'm wrong. I will say this though: it was good to hear you admit in your last talk there that the libertarian is the one who asked the tough questions. So I just want to formally welcome you to the Libertarian Party. If you want to come, we will open arms, big hug. Come on in. There's plenty of room for people in the Libertarian camp. So, but no, it was, listen.
Thank you.
We are definitely past our time. It was great to have you on. Get you on again in the future. I love these conversations with you. I always love your perspective. And tell people where they can find you if they want to follow you, or and just so you're clear, most of your tweets are in Spanish, but if you're on the at least computer, you click on it and translate tweets, and it does I'm guessing, a decent job of translating them. I don't know if you've ever checked that or not, but so Twitter or website, or where can people find you at?
Exactly. So no, well, thank you. Thank you again. Thank you, Ryan, for inviting me to your show. It was great. It was a great conversation. Likewise, I really enjoy your perspective about things, and then I always end up learning something new. So thank you again for inviting me. And no, you can find me. My Twitter handle is Tobal Vasquez, Vasquez. You'll find me there. Mostly I tweet in Spanish. Mostly I tweet things about Latin America, Colombia, U.S. Latin American relations, but also about Latin America relations and China. So thank you, Ryan. Thank you, and well, it was great to be on your show. And good luck in the next episodes, man.
Yeah, thank you so much. And we will link to that in the newsletter and the show notes for people to check out. And if we can find some of your tweets, translate them, we will include them as part of our coverage for South America. But yeah, no, seriously, it was good to have you on. And listeners, we will be back tomorrow. I think we have an episode. We'll be back tomorrow.